Hey guys, there's something else I wanted to talk to you about today. Um, where are we here? March 20th. So I don't even know what's going to be going on with all the coronavirus stuff. But this topic is, I think, very pertinent for this season, but it's an observation that I made a long time ago. One of the things that's common with the people that I work with is what we call reactive or hypervigilant patterns in the brain. Reactive is when somebody pulls in front of you in their vehicle and doesn't go fast enough, and you have to hit your brakes so that you don't hit them, and that changes your emotions and your behavior. That would be the definition of reactive. That's indicative of brain patterns that are what we call on overdrive or in beta mode. Now, high beta frequencies aren't bad, but they can be very uncomfortable or bad, if you will, when your brain is locked in those frequencies. And nearly everyone that I work with is locked in those frequencies. The hallmark of those type of patterns is what we call wired and tired. People feel physically or mentally exhausted, and yet when they lay down to go to sleep, they just lay there and think or toss or turn, or worse, just sweat. Those are all consistent with anxiety type patterns. Keep in mind, brain training doesn't fix, doesn't address, doesn't diagnose any actual medical condition. When I mention anxiety type patterns, I'm just talking about, as a trainer, patterns that we consistently see in the brain of people who say that they have anxiety, right? Because it's a bit subjective. And we make those observations the same way a personal trainer would make observations. Like, for instance, a trainer may take somebody who wants to improve their athletic performance, and one of the things we notice as a trainer is people with suboptimal athletic performance often have suboptimal core strength. Now, does that mean that everybody with a weak core is a bad athlete? Of course not. And does that mean if you have a great core, you're going to be great at your sport? Of course not. But it is a consistent pattern that we're able to identify. So if you were to come to me and say, hey, I need some help here, and if that's consistent with a pattern that we're used to seeing, I'll say, you know what, let's start training here, because I think that will get you the result that you're looking for. The type of personality behavior that we see with a person who has a hypervigilant brain. Right? I talked a little bit about physical symptoms. Physical symptoms that a person with a hypervigilant brain will feel would be consistent with anxiety, with insomnia, with having trouble, with regulating temperature. Those would be consistent with a hypervigilant brain. Also, that person would tend to be highly intelligent. If you look up statistically the IQ of people who have anxiety, you'll find that higher IQ people typically are the people who have anxiety. That's because there's a lot going on, and it's not bad for there to be a lot of activity, but it is inefficient and exhausting for there to be a lot of activity up here all the time. The most efficient brains fire up, do the activity that's required, and then come back down to baseline. That's what makes for a happy and efficient brain. Another behavior or a hallmark of people who have these high-wired, overdrive, hypervigilant brains is what is called manic type behavior. And especially if you've had a prolonged illness or trauma, you may be actually manifesting manic behaviors that everyone else sees, let alone manic patterns in the brain. And what that looks like is because the brain's trying to protect you from further trauma, there are areas, one area, oftentimes multiple areas in the brain that are going, well, what about this? What about this? What about this? Have you tried this? We should try this. Does that work? Is this going to work? How about this? Remember what happened? Right? That's what the brain's doing all day. Well, when the brain continues to do that, you may not be aware of it. But over time, as the brain does that, then your behavior and personality will start to reflect that. Here's why I bring that up, because this is really important. We live in a day and age where there is unlimited information available instantly at your fingertips. And so many people, especially a manic type personality with a manic type brain pattern, they're looking for more information. Here's what I've noticed as a mentor and trainer, is that information rarely changes a person's reality. If that were the case, then most people wouldn't have the problem because they could just get on the internet and get the information that they need, right? What we need is transformation, not information. Here's where I notice it really showing up. I am a part of several online communities, groups, Facebook groups, and there's some gurus that I follow, just like anybody else. But here's what I've noticed is people who are in the mindset of hypervigilant or anxious or reactive, right, are in a mindset of looking for information. They're information gatherers. And here's where I've noticed that can become a challenge. I see it especially in Facebook groups. They come into a group and they say, well, I have this. Or they Google, medical MD or whatever for the symptoms. And they're like, oh, yeah, well, yeah, that's the condition that I have, right? They diagnose themselves and then they go to some other website or group and start listing their either diagnosis or the symptoms. And then somebody will say, well, have you tried this? And then they go try that. Here's the problem with that. Number one, I've seen it very rarely actually fix the problem. It very rarely helps. Number two, the person who you got the advice from very rarely actually understands what your situation is and whether or not you even actually have an accurate diagnosis if you diagnosed yourself, right? And so you don't even know if that information is reliable. But here's the third and most important thing that I think most people don't look at or consider. That type of behavior, going from one group or going to a guru or going to a website, is actually reinforcing the negative pattern that's causing the negative symptoms in the body in the first place. Remember, the hypervigilant, overreactive brain's going, what about this? What about this? What about this? What about this? When you perpetuate that pattern by taking your actual activity into the real world or on the internet and saying, oh, well, what about this? Oh, well, what about this? You're literally reinforcing the pattern in the brain that needs to be rewritten to make the symptom go away in the first place. So patterns in the brain can not only cause or modify or govern specific behavior patterns, but they can also, I've learned recently that specific frequencies in the brain actually govern neurotransmitter production. So a person who has more beta is going to have more of that specific neurotransmitter, dopamine in this case. And so not only does that person have a dopamine sensitivity, which they're feeding with either compulsive or addictive behaviors, but they also have a pattern in the brain that's saying, what about this? What about this? So by nurturing that type of activity, you're actually literally physically reinforcing with new protein nourishment the brain pattern that causes that neurotic behavior, but you're also reinforcing that frequency that's causing the neurotransmitter imbalance in the first place. So we have to actually get to the root in order to change or manifest health. I know that this put a new wrinkle on my brain. This is something I really had to learn and process through years ago when I discovered this. But it's absolutely true. There are literally hundreds upon hundreds of studies that validate this. Guys, if you want to change the nervous system response, you got to change the habitual and automatic patterns, the way the brain responds to input. If you want to change your health, the foundation of your immune response is in the brain, the way it handles and responds to input. We call it stress or lack thereof, which is exactly why I call the group Rewiring the Stress Response, because that is exactly what we do. We've found over and over again, when the brain is resting when it's supposed to rest, firing at the frequencies it's supposed to fire at, and communicating where it's supposed to communicate, 80% of everyone's symptoms just go away on their own. I hope this was helpful. I'm going to keep rolling these out. I love you guys. I thank you for taking this journey with me. I'll be making more videos soon. Have a great day.